Report from Trenton. Across the Delaware River from the American camp was the small town of Trenton, New Jersey. This was one of many towns now in the hands of the British Army. Guarding the town were about 1,200 German soldiers. Americans called them Hessians because many of them came from the Hesse region of Germany. The Hessians took over most of the houses in Trenton and made themselves comfortable. My friend Sheffer and I lodged in a fine house belonging to a merchant, wrote one officer. This kind of invasion should get you out of school, right? Not if you went to Mistress Rogers' school for young ladies in Trenton, which stayed open all winter. We know this from letters that were sent to students that year. William Shippen, for instance, wrote to his daughter Nancy, age 13, saying, "My dear Nancy, I was pleased with your French letter, which was much better spelt than your English one, in which I was sorry to see 4 or 5 words wrong. Take care, my dear girl, of your spelling and your teeth." And while most families got out of Trenton when the enemy arrived, a few stayed to try to protect their homes. A 10-year-old girl named Martha Reed stayed in town with her mother and younger brother. Her father was off in the Continental Army. Martha later described the cold mid-December night that the enemy showed up at her door. "Mother and we 2 children were gathered in the family room," she said. "A great fire blazed in the chimney place. Suddenly there was a noise outside and the sound of many feet. The room door opened and in stalked several strange men." After warming up by the fire, the Hessian soldiers opened the storeroom and ate all the pickles and jarred vegetables. A bit later, they killed a hog and butchered it on the dinner table. Even though Martha's mother spoke no German, she somehow managed to convince the soldiers that her husband was serving in the British Army. So the Hessians agreed to let the Reeds stay in the house. A few days later, a child's coat gave the Reeds away. Martha explained, "To please my little brother, my mother had made him an officer's coat of the rebels' buff, gold and blue, in which he delighted to strut and fight imaginary battles." When the Hessians found the coat, they knew they'd been tricked. They were in the home of patriots. "What a storm broke out around us," Martha said. "They shook the little coat in our face, jabbering and threatening." Martha's mother pulled the children outside and they all hid in the hen house, normally a bad hiding place, since the chickens cluck and cackle when they're disturbed. Luckily, the soldiers had already eaten all their chickens. Martha and her family spent a freezing and frightening night in the empty hen house. "That was a night I can never forget," she said. Can you imagine that? These German soldiers show up at your house and now you have to leave your house while they live there? All right, next part, the lion in the tub. In command of the German forces in Trenton was Colonel Johann the Lion Rall. Bravery in battle earned Rall his nickname, but he was also kind of a lazy guy. He liked to stay up late drinking and playing cards. Then he would sleep late and spend the rest of the morning in the tub. "There were times," complained one of his officers, "when we would go to his quarters for the morning formation between 10 and 11 o'clock, and he would still be sitting in his bath." Rall was warned that the Americans might try to attack his army. He laughed and shouted, "Fiddlesticks! These clodhoppers will not attack us." Rall knew the Americans were starving, freezing, and ready to go home. He expected to enjoy a quiet winter at Trenton. Across the river. The sun set at 4:35 on December 25th. Christmas Day had been sunny and cold, about 32 degrees. Now clouds covered the stars and a miserable mixture of freezing rain and snow started falling. Washington ordered his soldiers to pack 60 rounds of ammunition and a 3-day supply of salted meat and bread. 16-year-old John Greenwood was one of the many soldiers who wondered where the army was going that night. He was hoping he wouldn't have to march too far, because he was suffering from a horrible rash on his leg. Or as he put it, "I had the itch then so bad that my breeches stuck to my thighs, all the skin being off, and there were hundreds of vermin upon me." Ooh. At least Greenwood had shoes. Many of the men had worn through theirs and had to tie rags around their bare feet. The soldiers gathered at the edge of the Delaware River. They saw black water clogged with bobbing, swirling chunks of ice. And they saw John Glover and his fishermen waiting to row them across the river. The boats started crossing and recrossing the water. It took many trips to get everyone over. Colonel Henry Knox, the cannon expert, was determined to get 18 cannons over the river. The floating ice in the river made the labor almost incredible, he reported. The night was cold and stormy. It hailed with great violence. John Greenwood was one of the first to cross the river. Then he stood on the New Jersey side waiting for hours. It rained, hailed, snowed, and froze, and at the same time blew a perfect hurricane, he said. He and the other men pulled down fences and lit fires in a useless effort to keep warm. They watched the boats and waited. Washington was watching and waiting too. I have never seen Washington so determined as he is now, an officer named John Fitzgerald wrote in his diary. He stands on the bank of the river, wrapped in his cloak, superintending the landing of the troops. He is calm and collected, but very determined. The plan had been to get the army across the Delaware River by midnight. But thanks to the ice in the river, it took until 3 in the morning. Washington knew he would not be able to reach Trenton before dawn. I determined to push on at all events, he said. The army began the 9-mile march to Trenton. Surprise! You often read about weather being a major factor in historical events. This was definitely true of the Trenton attack. On most nights, the Hessians in Trenton sent soldiers out to patrol the roads leading into town. But the night of December 25th was just too cold and nasty. The routine patrol was canceled. So Colonel Rall and his men were quite surprised when Washington and the Americans marched into town at about 8 o'clock in the morning. Hessian soldiers grabbed their guns and ran out onto the street. By the time they figured out what was going on, though, Washington's men had already had the town surrounded, and Henry Knox had his cannon set up and ready to go. These, in the twinkling of an eye, cleared the streets, Knox reported. There was absolutely nowhere for the Hessians to hide. They ran toward houses, but many of the women who had stayed in town suddenly stuck guns out the windows and started firing. The Battle of Trenton was over quickly. Colonel Rall was shot and killed. His entire army surrendered, except for a few men who managed to escape down the road. This is a glorious day for our country, Washington told his officers. And to make the day even better, American soldiers found lots of good stuff scattered around town. John Greenwood took a German sword as a souvenir. An American drummer threw his own drum away and picked up a much nicer German one. Other soldiers put fancy brass German officers' hats and strutted around town. Saved for now. After beating the Americans all year, British leaders in London had been sure they were about to win the war. But all our hopes were blasted by that unhappy affair at Trenton, said George Germain, King George's top war advisor. Washington wasn't done yet, though. He marched his troops to the town of Princeton and won another quick victory. These winter winds inspired thousands of new soldiers to join the army. The American Revolution was alive. A loyalist named Nicholas Creswell was truly sorry to see the sudden change in the mood of Americans. A few days ago, they had given up the cause for lost, Creswell said. Their late successes have turned the scale, and now they are all liberty mad again. But King George was still feeling confident. In fact, he had a new war plan, and he looked forward to crushing the revolution in 1777.